wonderful to be here. Feet on the ground, planet Earth, as it were. We're going to be touching on some really interesting topics tonight. We've got an amazing panel, and I'll give a brief overview of who they are and what expertise they bring. But this is definitely an opportunity for us all, not only to learn, but to build community here, right? We want you guys in the audience to actually partake in tonight. We want to ask you some questions. We want you guys to ask some questions back. We've got 2 hours. It's going to be fun. Hopefully we're all going to learn a little bit. So we definitely want to figure out who you guys are in the audience and what brings you here, what kind of things do you want to get out of tonight. So as we go through it, we'll pose it to you, but feel free to jump in at the right time too. And we definitely have some time at the end for some Q&A. So we'll start with Stan Scholl over here. Some of you, I know, recognize him. He's one of the smartest guys I'll ever meet, to be fair. He is a rocket scientist, and he's one of those people who lives up to that claim. He knows everything about everything. He has facts coming out of his ears. Amazing guy. He currently advises on space criteria, space strategy and things, so he'll bring that perspective on the business side. So Yan here, who I'm sure everyone knows a little bit about at least, right? Astronaut, says it all, right? So much knowledge, enough said. Matt here, another rocket scientist, actually worked at Blue Origin for many years, from when it was a tiny company to when it was very big. James is just as big as not as just a person, he is a big guy. But as big as a brain when it comes to Mars. He spent 20 years studying Mars, learning about Mars. He runs the Seattle chapter for the Mars Society. He's also building a Mars VR solution to help train people what it's going to be like. And one of the things he's going to talk about today is actually he's sending a load of people over to, and he will oversee a group of people living in a desert for 2 weeks, simulating what it's going to be like on Mars. So that's my panel. Big, quick round of applause for them. And with that, I've got this little gadget here in my hand that will actually just allow me to change the screen behind. But we're going to have 4 questions, and then we're going to go into some open questions as well. There's going to be some polls, there's going to be a few prizes, there's going to be some questions, as long as this works. All right, so the first thing to touch on, as many of you probably have some idea, right? We live in this really cozy, safe environment where life thrives, it's great. Anything outside of a very short distance indeed, and you're into the zone of the unknown, right? We're starting to understand it, but the things we're understanding about it, it's not a very nice place. It's extremely dangerous, and there's some facts that we'll bring up as we go through. But as you can see, the chance of getting cancer, the chance of having problems with your eyes, the problem with your bones, your muscles, etc., it is nasty out there. So the first question we're going to ask to the panel, and each of these questions is going to be somewhat open, just so they can each explore it from their own perspectives. But the first question that we want to ask them is essentially, why on earth would anybody ever want to go? And Paul actually stole my thunder on that first question, which leads us straight into this, which is great, which is just to see of you guys here tonight, how many of you would want to go? And it looked like it was almost half. We'll ask that same question at the end as well, just to see if anybody changed their minds. So with that being said, why on earth should we go to Mars? Who wants to start?
I'd love to start that. So I work a lot with a man named Dr. Robert Zubrin, and he answers this question in 3 ways. We would go for the challenge, we would go for the science, and we would go for the future. So the challenge would be, we would really inspire the world if we were able to send humans to Mars. You would inspire a whole generation of people all over the world to study math and science. You would give them something that was a positive vision for humanity. And it's a technical challenge that no one's ever done. It's a very hard technical challenge. For the science, because there are so many things we can discover on Mars. For one thing we could discover, is there life on Mars? And really that's the big question of, is there life in the universe? We can have, if we find life on Mars, based on what it is, we can know, is life possible throughout the universe, or are we the only place in the universe that has life? So big question, kind of a big question. People have been wondering that for thousands of years, and our generation, we can go answer that question. and then for the future. I mean, if we are able to go build a branch of human civilization on Mars, then people hundreds of years from now look back at this time. You know, right now, people 1,000 years from now, they're not going to care like who the president is or which trade war we're having. They're going to know that this was when people first went to the moon, around this time, is when people first went to the moon. So if we are able to go to Mars and build a whole branch of human civilization that then goes out into the solar system, they're going to look back on this time as when it got started. And so if you're able to do something great, you should.
Nicely said. Anybody else?
So I just wondering about the question first, because when we ask the why, and then its answer should be kind of like convincing somebody, yeah, because of this you should go, right? But I don't like that kind of thing, because everybody has a different reason, and then everybody has a different taste. So not only Mars, but also any place. Somebody really want to go, and somebody doesn't want to go at all, even if someone paid for you. So yeah, that was the first realization when I had a Georgia flight. And I really want to have a Georgia flight in Russia, huge airplane, and I can fly like in space. At the time I was a candidate, so I didn't know if I go real space or not. I really was attempting to do that. But that program, we have several cameramen to show how Georgia looks like to whole Korean public. And then one of the cameramen after the Georgia flight, he said, if my company make me fly this plane again, I will quit my job. I really hate it. And even if because of the salary, I tried once, but if they put me another one, I will not. And then I realized, oh my God, I believe everybody want to go, but not everybody. So that's the beauty of the variety and diversity. So space and Mars, it might be same. So some people want to go without having any reason, like I really want to go to the PGs and Everest and any kind of place, even if it's dangerous, it's not that fun. If you go to the Mongolia, there's no toilet at all. So one of my colleagues doesn't want to drink water at all. She doesn't want to go primitive toilet at all. She just came here only because TV company paid for. But my case is I really want to go riding the horse and look on the whole empty desert. So I saw her like, oh, it's a different. So space and Mars, I think is the same. If somebody really want to go like Earth, let them go and help. And on the way, we can make a lot of technology and huge thing. And after that, we can share with you guys. And someone doesn't want to go at all, but they can kind of curious about that. Or sometimes some people hate the space at all, but they love to use the space technology. And some people, I kind of waste tax for the space program at all, but they still using the GPS on their phone, watching the satellite TV. So yeah, that question sometimes make me feel a little bit uncomfortable. But to me, why? Without any reason, I really want to go.
Yeah. One of the questions that comes up a lot, or one of the dichotomies in the space business is, should we send humans or robots? And it's very much a false choice. Mm-hmm. And if you just think about the science of Mars, which I think is wonderful, but to spend 40, 100, 400 billion dollars to go to Mars for the science, the National Science Foundation, we spend $8 billion a year. The National Institutes of Mental Health, we spend $2 billion. Are we really going to spend 40 or 80 or 100 or 200 billion dollars, 100 times more than we spend on mental health, to go find out whether there's life on Mars? I don't think science is a primary reason. It's one of the reasons, but I'm more, and James said, I call it reason number one, which is when John Kennedy, when we went to the moon, he said we do it because it is hard, and he said we have to have some faith that there will be benefits that will accrue. And they didn't know, he said, we don't know what those benefits will be, but now we do know, because we can look back at Apollo, and we can see the invention of the transistor and all the computing age and everything that's come after that, and we can see the growth in the economy and the number of jobs that were created. And I'm not talking about space jobs, I'm talking about all the unemployment that you don't see today because we have a robust economy because of that. So to me, it's because it's hard, it's because it's a challenge, and it measures the best of our abilities and talents.
And I agree with, the only thing I can add to that is, at a very practical species level, we need to live somewhere else. There's so many things out in space that are going to try to kill us. And they are going to happen eventually. A big rock is going to hit this planet again, eventually. And we need to live on another one. so that if we can't divert that one, we can continue to exist. I want the species to keep going. So as much as I want it to boost the economy, and as much as I want the adventure and the inspiration, 1,000,000 years from now, we need to be on another planet. And Mars looks like our best candidate. I love cloud cities on Venus. I really want that to happen too. But let's go Mars first. And then we have 5 billion years to figure it out, how to get out of the solar system. Before the sun goes red giant, we get that first step, and then you have a long time to figure out how to get to the next star.
How about move whole Earth to other places? I love that movie.
We're tied to our power source.
Wonder Earth. It's a Chinese movie with Wonder. They made the whole Earth moving to other place to survive. That was cool.
It's pretty fancy. A little bit beyond our tech right now. All right, let's move on to the next question. And in case you didn't notice as well, by the way, all of the pictures are real space pictures. Most of them, the question pictures, are actually selfies from Curiosity from Mars. So some of them look like they're just in a random desert on Earth. They're not. They're all actually from Mars. So this is kind of an easy answer, right? But of all of the missions that have gone to Mars for landings, there have actually been 8.5, we could say, but one of them died on entry. Another Russian landing attempt actually lasted 20 odd seconds or something, right? But of all 7 successful landings, and we'll get to the big number of how many have actually attempted to get there, right? But of the 7 successful landings, they've all come from the US, which opens up the question, right? If this is really a space race that's on right now, who's really going to do it? And not just is it a country, is it a collaboration between the countries? We now have things like SpaceX and Blue Origin and those other concepts of getting people into space and moving them around between the planets. How does that work with the government, right? So this whole big question of who, right? Who's going to get there first? How's that going to work? Where's the collaboration going to come in? I'm typically a boy around that. Anybody want to go first?
Well, I can start then. So I think there are really, if you were to handicap that at this point in time, you'd have to say there are 3 entities in the world that have the desired potential to get to Mars in the, say, 20 to 50 year time frame, maybe 10 years if you're really optimistic. But and that would be the United States, with or without international partners, China, with or without international partners, and SpaceX, probably with some partners. And those are the 3 organizations that could do it. In my view, the US government is not likely to get active in pursuing that unless the United States is feeling under threat from China in a new space race. Mars has always been a little bit of an out there goal for the US. Over 5 decades, it's always been moon or asteroid or something first, and then Mars. The Office of Inspector General of NASA looked at all the different Mars plans over the years and said basically there's never been a Mars plan, there's only been a strategic framework. So the United States has never really had a Mars plan in any detail. But I think there's a very real possibility that the path to Mars actually leads through Redmond, Washington. And the reason I say that is because right now in Redmond, SpaceX is building about 7 satellites a day. This is more satellites than everyone else on the whole Earth is building per day. And the reason they're doing this is because Elon Musk needs a way to generate billions of dollars of cash so that he can go to Mars. It's a bit of a far-fetched plan when you look at the financials. I actually spent yesterday going through all their finances and the numbers to see how much money they've raised and where it's come from. And it's a tough slog, but if they can put up a constellation of 10,000 or 40,000 satellites and make 20 or 30 billion dollars a year of revenue, and they can pull in a few $billion a year of cash from that and some other sources, then they can start to have a realistic chance of their test fails, test succeed, plan to get to Mars. So I think that's an interesting thing to watch, and a key part of it's happening right here in our area.
Yeah, and SpaceX, it can't be understated enough how impressive what they have done up till now is. They are truly disrupting the traditional aerospace industry, may even disrupt the airline industry in a couple of years with their new rocket, but Last year, SpaceX launched more rockets than anyone else in the world combined. And right now in Boca Chica, Texas, they are building a factory, not just one rocket, but a factory to build spaceship rockets to go to Mars and to do a bunch of other things. So it's amazing what they're doing, and I think I completely agree with you. It's the US, China, and SpaceX right now, but there could be another SpaceX that comes along very quickly. I mean, there's other countries like China, Russia, UAE that are interested in starting up these SpaceX-like companies, and we might see some other players enter the scene soon.
There is no business case to go to Mars, so it would have to be someone else who, like Elon Musk, just wants to do it for humanity's sake.
Is there a chance that the US and China get together, do something together?
There's a chance.
Hopefully. Because whenever we ask that kind of question to the head of the agency, both of them always ask other person. Yeah, when we ask the NASA administrator, do you think we will have a plan to collaborate on each other? And he said, you better ask Chinese agency. And then we asked the Chinese agency, they said, we're always ready whenever America is ready. So it seems quite politically hard, I think, yeah.
But what about on the tech side, right?
So like what Stan was saying, there isn't a business case. So you're looking at what are all the smaller things, like not first person to Mars, but like smaller space agencies like India and Japan have rockets and are sending missions, so that you don't have to wait for boots on the ground to start working on technology at the red planet, so you can prove it works. You can work on your landers, you can work on your rovers, you can work on all of your orbiters, and learn more, and eventually you'll find those business cases. You'll find where's the water that we can turn into fuel and support actual settlement. And it doesn't have to be just those big three. Europeans are going to have a play in this also, but not maybe first manned mission, first crewed mission.
For those that don't know, this summer is one of those orbital windows when you can do a launch to Mars, and there will be 4 different missions leaving Earth, hopefully, from different countries. The Europeans have a rover that's going to Mars. The United States has a rover going to Mars. United Arab Emirates has a orbiter that's going to Mars, and China has an orbiter, a lander, and a rover going to Mars. And so we should see for Mars fans, there should be some cool stuff happening about this time next year.
See what I mean about these fascinating facts? That's amazing. So let's actually take a break for a moment, and let's look at everybody in the audience. How many out there actually kind of do things in the aerospace industry for a job?
That's actually neat. It isn't the
Yeah.
majority. It's a small minority, actually.
How many of you kind of have some hobby that's related to space-related activities? Yeah. And the rest of you, does anybody teach or do anything like that?
Education.
Yeah, in education space? You're hand up for everyone.
Yeah.
I love it.
Well, I'm a student at University of Washington.
Yeah.
I'm a double E, graduating this year, so I'm doing an internship in an aerospace company at Commons Aerospace. I'm in the CubeSat team, which just got funding from NASA.
Yeah.
And got selected. So the CubeSat is my hobby, and that's like my passion right now. So
Oh, cool.
Excellent. And what's your name, sorry?
Jonathan,
Jonathan.
Casimir.
Boom.
I don't know if this counts, but I work on a project with NASA in high school.
Yeah. Yeah. That's cool. And everybody else is just generally interested?
Anyone thinks space exploration is just a terrible idea and a big waste of money? That's okay if you
Well,
think
I
that.
had a comment, about the whole of corporations are in on it. If you ever read about Noam Chomsky and the problems of nations losing out to multinational corporations and just losing their power because these corporations are just becoming so powerful potentially, especially like SpaceX. If their satellite business does take off, they take over the world or take over all internet connectivity and make billions or trillions of dollars from that. And that there's a negative side to that. I mean, do you have an opinion on that? Or?
Yeah, my opinion is that it's maybe something to worry about, but SpaceX is maybe a $2 billion a year revenue company. They're probably burning $2 billion a year of cash on top of that. If they get this successful constellation and make $30 billion a year, it'll be a drop in the bucket compared to a $1.5 trillion telecommunications industry. They're anywhere near the size to worry about them for decades. The space industry as a whole, if you believe the statistics, they say it's a $400 billion industry, but if you look at things, it's really satellites, rockets, and operating things in space, it's about the size of Walmart revenue. It's big, but it's not huge.
Trevor, do you have something there?
Oh, it was, you asked if anyone thought it was both a terrible idea and there was, no reason to do it. I mean, we heard lots of reasons to do it, none of them using practical sort of business metrics, right? There's no reason to do it. It's very dangerous. It's not very safe. A lot of people are going to die. It's going to be a huge waste of money. The reality is most of our economy is driven off of other things that are a huge waste of money, right? So we need to spend the money. But for all practical purposes, yes, it's a terrible idea and most people shouldn't do it. It's going to kill a lot of us, or a lot of them. So I think you have to think about the reasons to do it that are bigger than any individual company, any individual government, any individual regime or current president or current administration. And that's, obviously the biggest problem with all of space exploration and all of real science, in fact, is that it is much bigger than anyone's budgetary horizon, vision horizon, or anything else. So yeah, I think most practical people say it's a terrible idea and it's probably not an investment you want to make. And yet it has to be done because of the reasons you guys mentioned.
And those are the investments that governments should make, that are long-term and only come back as you do those basic science and those basic exploration and those things that pull the rest of the economy with them. Like all the Apollo spinouts and Stan, do you know what the payoff in dollars spent in space?
No, they always cite 7 to 1, but
Yeah.
who knows?
But it's high,
Yeah.
whatever it is. And this will be the next place for and this is just my opinion, for governments to invest their money. Because if you're looking to make a business now, you're looking at low Earth orbit. You are not, satellites, low Earth orbit, ISS, not, let's send something to Mars that's gonna make any money.
It's analogous to the railroads. The government funded the railroads, they funded telegraph lines. Those didn't have immediate payoffs, but obviously they were huge for our
The
society.
thing I would compare this to is just imagine like the late 1400s, early 1500s, if you could have been there when Magellan or Columbus or some of the other folks set sail on these amazing adventures. I'm sure the average citizen didn't notice, didn't care, didn't think it was historic. But if you know what's going on, and if you're lucky enough that, like I have to have gone and seen several rocket launches, you feel it. If you have any little spirit in your soul, you feel it, and it's pretty powerful. I know that's not an economic argument, Trevor, but there's your spiritual one.
And then if it's economic benefits are clear, we don't have to have these kind of things.
Right.
Already somebody should be done, yeah.
All right, good stuff.
Did you have a hand up?
Yeah,
Oh, sorry.
General question, this may be kind of off topic. From a military perspective, acknowledging and recognizing the military foundations of the American space program, the Soviet space programs, and so on and so forth, as a foundation for semiconductors, computers, so on and so forth, DARPA back in the 60s and 70s, this type of thing. What kinds of military programs do you see or do you envision that would provide the funding at a government level for a Mars program?
So I mean, SpaceX is getting some funding now for rocket development because they're launching some defense payloads. I think really it comes to, a lot of these things come down to lack of leadership, right? Like the question earlier, the comment earlier about the heads of NASA and the Chinese looking at, pointing the finger at each other. It just takes a little bit of leadership to say, we're gonna go to Mars, or we're gonna go do this big project in space. And I think everyone would fall in line, so. Any other thoughts, guys? on this question?
From a military perspective, right now, NASA's annual budget is around 25 billion, and maybe 15 billion of that is space. The defense space budget is at least twice that, so in the United States it's probably 30, 40 billion, something like that, depending on all the intelligence, the National Reconnaissance Office, NSA, IGA, and groups like that, CIA and others. So there's definitely more spending there, but I don't see any reason why the military would go have anything to do with Mars. Even the Space Force, newly established Space Force, which at this point is simply just a reorg of Air Force into a new name. But it's the beginning of something that will enable career. If you're interested in space in the military, you can have a career and you can consolidate the ability to procure space things. So it's probably had to happen sometime sooner or later. And so this will be the beginning of that. But even Mars, Moon, none of that's good. They're all about protecting the constellations of satellites in space, making sure we can protect against the GPS getting taken out, preserve missile warning attacks, be able to watch the things like when the US and Iran had that altercation and Iran launched a missile, those kind of things are all detected from space. So I think that's the focus, and the technology, I agree with you, that comes out of that will help a lot of things, but I don't see a connection to Mars anytime soon.
Kind of, actually a long time ago, because satellites and low orbit and everything are connected with the security of their own sovereign. But that's because they're fueling for the whole space program. But over the lowers and then more than the moons and Mars, it's not the place to fight against each other. So I don't think military might have some kind of fine idea to support that. But they can fueling, like you said, they can fueling to order the satellite to the SpaceX, and then SpaceX earn the money, and they can use that money for the Mars. That might be the indirect way.
I may not have phrased my question the best way. More from the standpoint of basic research.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And again,
Sure.
I'll go to semiconductors, I'll go to miniaturization of electronics, that type of thing where it's not going to make the business case to invest that kind of basic research, but if you have a government contract and you have an incentive on the part of whatever's going for Bell Labs these days or that kind of thing, to let's figure out how to do this because we have a problem we need to solve, and it's not soluble with current techniques.
A lot of the real basic research in low Earth orbit is around biotech, crystal growth, metallurgy, and there may be some stuff there, but it's not really being funded right now. The things that I see happening on the military side that would have effects on Mars missions actually are things like Northrop Grumman is just doing the first prototype for satellite servicing. So you're talking about sending a robot to fix, refuel, reposition, and all of that, autonomous rendezvous, all of and this is really more on the engineering side than the real basic science stuff. This hasn't been done before. And someone needs to figure out all the bugs and how to do that. But if we can have them do that autonomously in low Earth orbit or at Lagrange point 1 or in orbit around the moon, you can do it at Mars. The robots don't care. So once you work on those autonomous technologies, and then these sort of one step further, right now we launch things, and if they break, they're junk, and we're waiting for them to fall out of the sky, problems. As we start to have more of an economy in space, there are things the military is doing right now that will feed that sort of stuff that you see in the Expanse. And we'll have that sort of like, well, go get the space junk, bring it down. Go fix that old satellite, or I'm waiting for the salvage on that satellite. In 2 weeks, if they don't do something with their satellite, I can go get it. And maybe you could go up and reboot a telecom satellite if you have the right technology to do it with. And the military is playing in that space right now, probably because they want to take out a Chinese satellite without shooting it down. And the Russians are shadowing our satellites. And you can't tell from the ground easily if this isn't a conspiracy theory. This is things that the governments do. If they rendezvous with one of our satellites, would we even know? if it tried to dock, there isn't a docking port on them. There will be, like they're working on that. But right now you're watching from the ground and you're watching radar and you're watching them get close together and you're wondering if they're doing a flyby, but they're following our satellites around, the sort of vulnerability of GPS. The things that the military is working on right now would just have applications. They aren't doing as much of the basic research. We were talking earlier about single crystal turbine blades that you can grow in zero gravity, that Boeing would be really interested in for just building really high efficient engines, because you make turbine blades that last forever. And those sorts of things aren't necessarily, the military would be interested in them, but they aren't funding it. Sadly, no.
It made me think though, I think that we'll know the space economy has arrived when there are space pirates.
Stealing a satellite.
Isn't that right?
James Bond.
Yeah.
Jumping a claim?
I can't wait. I can't wait till there are space pirates.
What?
Can't wait.
Asteroid rustlers?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh. Well, no, we'll do fine. Here we go. All right. Okay.
Yeah. Ooh.
So another little fascinating fact, right? We talked about the fact that it's a dangerous place out there. But even in the security of a spaceship, it's a dangerous place. It's extremely hard to go to the toilet, right? It's true, so I can tell you. If you are not careful with the stuff you're expelling from your body, you can actually die from it, right? So the circulation of air, you have one little problem, there is no rescue mission that's going to get there in time. So it leads us to our next question. How on earth is this even possible? Given all the restrictions, the constraints, the pricing, how is this even going to be possible? What kind of tech do we need to get us there? What kind of collaboration on the humanity side do we get there? There's being together for several hundred days with a very small crew in a very small capsule. That's pretty intense. And I guess if anybody knows about that, it's you, Sam.
Yeah, she had to sit up here with us.
So perhaps we can start on that with the humanitarian side of it, right? What's it like to be with someone for a long period of time and then?
Yeah, right. And then we have some kind of saying. I've never seen that, and we've never evidence about that. But always among the astronauts, we say, if you go up to the space, there's only two choices with your crew. Either will be the forever, whole rest of life your enemy, or forever your family, and then one of them kind of blood brothers. Because kind of isolated area, they are all together. Even if ISS is quite big enough, but still it's small enough also. And all those things cannot help sharing each other because, yeah, by brain you can understand. So when I had a training, especially about the restroom training, and that is even more ridiculous. With the mid 30 years old, you should have a training for using the toilet. But we should, yeah. And then my instructor every day, whenever I have a toilet training, he said, whatever things happen, you should call everyone. So you should call out everyone because whatever things happen inside of the toilet, it should be related with the water or liquid. And if it fly out there, it can kill everybody because if it's something really critical, machines are dead by the drop of the little water, it could kill everybody. So you should call everybody in a small little block of the toilet and help you.
Help you clean.
So, yeah. You can understand why. And all those instructors' discipline is makes sense. But as a person and human, can you really call everybody? Yeah, even 3-year-old boy feel embarrassing to call mom after they grow up a little bit. But how can you do that? And that's the thing, you cannot help being either enemy or brother because they should share everything. They should be kind of comfortable to share everything. And whatever I made a mistake, what if I just kind of hide it? Then they can kill everybody. So you should be brave enough to share your mistake. And you should be kind of frank enough and honest enough to share any kind of problem to anybody, even if it's a critical mistake, because you don't want to make this problem even bigger. So that's So some people are thinking about physically hard and physically tough. But as a person who's been already, it's a quite mentally, psychologically tough and hard because it's totally a different place. So yeah, every time whenever I go to the toilet, I just have a brain in my bag. I know how to use. I know what's the right way, but whenever you use your vacuum, whenever you use your computer or phone, even if you don't do anything, something wrong and make you feel uncomfortable, right? So what if my pump is stopped in the middle of my job inside of the toilet? Then I should call everybody, and all 4 are guys. And then I don't have even time to pull my pants at all. I should call by the discipline, but yeah, that's a huge thing. And not only toileting, but also breathing, like a CO2. And if the ventilation is not working, your CO2 is stay in front of your mouth because there's no convection, there's no gravity. Then you can kill yourself because of that. So you cannot blame anybody. Just the CO2 remover is not working, then you can kill yourself. So all those kind of things, every single second, you should face it, your death and life problem. And that's because working efficiency of your work is not good, because every single second you should think about the consequence of what you are doing. Not because they are stupid, but because they should think about all those consequences, every single astronaut, whatever they do. And even if on the YouTube channel, they play with the juice and Jelly Belly, it looks really happy. We do because of the 5-year-old who watching the NASA TV, but all the instructor, all the mission control, they hate it. Yeah, whenever astronauts play with the drop of the water, outside the scene, outside the camera, all astronauts should carry the towel to catch it. What if they miss one droplet of the water? And whenever they play with the Jelly Belly, we shouldn't kind of lose anyone Jelly Belly because they can go in any place to plug the something. So yeah, that we should face all those kind of things. We've never thought about that in space. That's because we believe dangerous. But most interesting thing is, whoever astronaut who've been there with facing that dangerous, and in my case is I was almost killed. But right after coming back, if you go to that, do you want to go back? They just said, in a second, yes. So that's the beauty of space.
Let's touch on that very quickly, without giving too much time on his, but you mentioned this, that you can't leave the cliffhanger there, that you almost died, right? Do you want to explain to people what that means? You came to Earth and almost died, right? Not on a planet where you've got minutes of delay of communication. You were trying to get back home and you almost died. Can you tell everybody a little bit about that?
You're right, I have 2 incidents with the accident, but first one is a false alarm. So during our flight, we have a huge alarm going on. It means we have a depressurization. It means station has a little hole and then pressure is going out. And we will all freak out and check it out, everything, and we realize it's a false alarm. Thank God, yeah. And then second one is a real accident on the way back. And undocking, we coming down, and then Soyuz capsule has 3 compartments, so habitation compartment, descending module, and then instrument compartment. So on the way down, they should separate only descending module, the module you could see on the Museum of Flight, Charles Simonel donated, and that small little thing should come down. But on the way down, we don't have a good separation with the top one. So we still have a top one is flipping like that on top, even if a computer said we have a successful separation. So that is also false kind of thing. And we should do the upside down, coming down like that. In general, so the capsule, you have a heat shield on the bottom, so we should come down like that, and then parachute open like this, and then come down. But because of the huge mass on top of us, we just come down like that, and then this habitation module doesn't have any heat shield at all, so it's a burning. And the mass is kind of decreasing. And finally, our hatch is also burning. So outside of the hatch and radio kind of antennas and everything is all burnt out. But very critically, several seconds before burn whole hatch, we have a small little first step of the parachute was detached and then rotate whole our capsule, and then we have a right direction. Maybe, thank God, our heat shield might be really clean. But anyway, we turning back, and we have another parachute coming up, and we come down. But inside We didn't know, and we knew that our direction is a little bit odd. We knew that we have a little bit more shaky, and then we knew that we have a much heavier G, like a 16 G for several seconds.
Yeah, they're gonna get that 16 Gs.
But several seconds, not for a whole minute. And computer said, computer said we have a problem, so they just changed the whole flight module mode to the ballistic reentry, means we don't have any control, so like a bullet coming down. And so we are ready, but we didn't know what exactly happened outside. But once we finally land in the middle of the Kazakhstan nowhere, we don't know, because whole signal is gone, whole antenna is gone. So mission control in the Moscow and also Houston, they don't know where we are. They even prepare for our death because they couldn't find us at all.
And you are 500 kilometers
yeah,
away?
kilometer away from the designated area, so we are outside of the, because most of the mission control, they knew where we penetrate through the atmosphere, so all their radar looking at that. But our accident happened above there, so we just penetrating other way around, so they cannot catch us at all.
So imagine if you're a mouse, there's no Kazakhstan that you're gonna land in.
Yeah, right, right.
Right, you got 500 kilometers to get back somehow.
Yeah, right,
the way
yeah,
the
right.
base is.
So yeah, I realized that after all the things done, and an investigation team comes to us separate, privately before making the public announcement. They said we beat the several second life and death window to turn around, and then that was amazing. And then, but in the same time, I became quite lucky because among the all other astronauts around the world, 500 a little bit more, and then most of the astronauts maybe should not know me because I'm just 11 days staying, 1 year training, quite rookie. But thanks to that accident, all the astronaut knows me, and then they come to me and ask about that. And then, so yeah, as far as I'm survived, as far as I came back with the one piece.
Did you ever think about the odds? There's been maybe almost 600 people who've been in space, and roughly 3% of them have, 3.5% have died trying to get to or from space or in a capsule prepping for space.
Yeah, right.
And that's just to get to low Earth orbit. Mostly 24 people went to the moon, but so that's pretty high odds. I mean, that's
Yeah, you're right.
for
you're
one
right.
mission, 3% chance.
Yeah, right.
Did
It's
you know
just-
that when you went into it?
Yeah, of course, because
Okay.
during the training, they tell us number, but that number is not visualized because everybody, when you sit under your car in the morning, you've never thought about how many car accidents happen
Oh, I
in a
do.
day.
It's about 1 in 5 million every time you get a car.
Yeah, right. And it's also quite high rate. Yeah. Even if you are not killed, but thinking about just accident, it's much higher rate. And then you might feel kind of scared, but you don't because you see a lot of other people who's driving back home safely. And then me too also, I'm kind of spoiled during the training for a whole year. All astronauts around me talking about fantasy, good things. They even never talk about bad things, minor things. So I just feel more jealous about, I really want to experience exactly what he's talking about, yeah.
So an interesting question quickly for the audience. Who here thinks they have an idea, an understanding of how big space is and how far away Mars is? Put your hands up if you think, yeah, I've got a rough idea. Do you want to get your gadgets out?
Space is closer than Portland. I'll tell you that. I need 3 volunteers. I need someone to be Earth. Who wants to be Earth? Come on up. This will just take a minute. You're Earth. Come on up here. Thanks for our astronaut.
So you are Earth?
I need someone to be the moon next. Who wants to be moon? Nels, you interested? Okay. So this is the Earth. These are to scale. So this is the Earth. By the way, I'll just show you real quick. Most astronauts who've been into space, like Soyuz, have gone in Earth orbit, and they travel about, Earth orbit is about this high off the Earth. It's less distance than the width of my Fisher space pen. Okay.
So of the 550 people into space,
Most of them have been here. Only 24 have been to the moon. So, and Nels is going to start walking till he thinks we're about where the moon should be.
What's the scale?
What do you guys- what do you guys think? Say more or less as he moves around, right?
About there, that's good. So that's about how far the moon is away. So 400 kilometers to low Earth orbit, 400,000 kilometers to the moon. Okay, so that's 1,000 times farther. Who wants to be Mars? Mars, could you like hiking?
Should I start running?
So Mars varies between about 55 million and 400 million kilometers.
Yeah.
So that's 4.7 miles. So what you need to do, I want you to go to Green Lake, swim out into the middle, and then take a selfie and hold it up and send it back to us.
Back in 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So that gives you a sense of scale.
Uh-huh.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Would anybody have got those distances about right? Yeah, it's really hard to even comprehend how much nothingness there is, right?
And how small Mars is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
In comparison.
And that's actually half inch too big.
Like you look at the numbers, you look at photos, but like,
Actually, do you want to grab those up?
like
Even
how
though-
much smaller the red planet is really.
Yeah.
Even though Mars is
Basketball.
smaller than the Earth though, because Mars is all land, it has as much land as the Earth. So that's one interesting fact.
Yeah.
And it's 3 days to get to the moon with conventional propulsion. It'd be about 6 to 8 months to get to Mars, one way. So a mission to Mars would generally be about 3 years. You'd have to wait for the opportunity to open up. That happens every 26 months. There's one
They
this
all
summer.
move around. Yeah.
But then you'd send a crew out, they'd take about 6 to 8 months to get there. Then one of the mission architectures has them staying for about a year on the surface and then waiting for the opportunity to come home to open up. And then they come back. So
If
about
you're 9 months in and you have an appendicitis or something, you have to deal with it. You can't come back. You have to wait. Yeah.
And it's a really important point, and there's a lot of people who aren't in the business, right? To read between the lines of what those guys just said. You can only go to Mars roughly every 2 and a bit years, right? So during that mission, if you have a problem, there is probably a 2-year wait before someone can really get you. So you've got to live on your own or die on your own, essentially.
Or you go to the Earth's in the far future and it's like the Expanse and you just turn on the afterburners and you go under 1G and then everything changes. But for the near future, this is what it is.
Yeah. What about from the kind of the tech side, the engine side, right?
Oh,
How are we gonna be able to get there?
if we move budget, we can go now.
Really?
Sure, right now. Like, we just design the new ship and go. But there isn't nearly enough money. So you're talking like, if you wanna go right away, half the defense budget. But it's money we all have and are all currently spending in a way that we all vote to spend that money. So if we wanna talk about, you know, we have problems here on Earth, let's not go to space thing. Well, hey Columbus, we have problems in Spain. Let's not go to the New World. And how silly that statement sounds to me. We have the money, we could spend it on other things if we chose to. So that political will, if you know, it would take a huge majority of the American people to say, stop doing these things, spend our money this way. We could go right now.
But even within the current NASA budget, which is just, which is actually in a little bit of a growth period right now, over 20 or 30 years, the government could put enough together to do it. And the total NASA budget is, you know, 1/10 of 1% of the size of the U.S. economy. So it's pretty small peanuts. As someone who makes $100,000 a year, spend, you know, $500 or $100 a year, that's kind of the scale we're talking about. It's big, but it's not huge. It's the first time in history that going to Mars is possible by multiple governments in the world. China could do it too.
Yeah, Neil deGrasse Tyson loves it's half a penny of every tax dollar is spent on NASA.
Right.
So if you're cutting into the dollar from the edge, you don't even make it to the printing, you're just still in the border. So we could go now, the technology is here, we would just have to, it's all engineering at that point. It's all just designing a new thing and getting it built.
If you have really crazy enough person who have a lot of money, and he decided to go, then we can do right away.
He's running for president, I think.
And what is that new tech that's gonna do that?
Oh, you just have to decide on what the mission architecture is. So when are you leaving? Are you taking the shortest time to get there? The shortest miles to get there? Like the lowest energy to get there? You know, least amount of rocket fuel? How many people do you send? How big of a ship? How do you protect them from radiation? Will all of the things from the ISS actually work on a long mission with no resupply? Because when the shuttle was shut down and we didn't have anything but Soyuz to go up, there was a window of, we don't have a rocket that can resupply the ISS. So there was a clock ticking down until they're out of supplies and they have to come home and abandon a $100 billion space station because we just couldn't get anything up there. So the space station is not self-sufficient enough to say, like, strap rockets on the side of it and boost it to Mars. But there are architectures that would be something like that, where you would build a mini space station and you would send that to Mars and put it in orbit and then make short hops to the surface and live in the space station. And then there's true get on the ground settlements, make your dome and cover it in earth, well, I guess Mars dirt, to protect you from the radiation. You can live half underground. There's all of these ideas, and basically it would take that leadership to decide we have this much money, which would need to be a lot more, and then what do we want to do with it?
The mission architecture you mentioned, where you build a station first in orbit and then send it, that's similar to what NASA wants to do. Also, the way they want to go back to the moon is to build the Lunar Orbital Gateway. At the Mars Society, we actually favor a different architecture, which is called Mars Direct. And the idea with that is that you would actually send out your return vehicle first to Mars, have it land, and then it would suck in the Martian air, which is mostly carbon dioxide, react it with a little bit of water that you found on Mars, and you can make methane rocket fuel. Then you'd fuel up your return vehicle, and only when that was ready, then you would send the people on the second flight. And so if you have a smaller mission like that, you could actually fit that well within NASA's budget. We've been advocating for that for about 20 years now.
So who's gonna be first to Mars? Is it gonna be SpaceX or, probably at this point? You said the US government's not really.
There's no telling. It could go any way. SpaceX certainly has the motivation to do it, but do they have they have to be successful in everything they're doing right now in a very extraordinary way in order to generate enough money to do it in a reasonable time period. And maybe they will. SpaceX has pulled off just about the most amazing set of things I've ever seen in my 30 years in space industry. I couldn't have envisioned this when I graduated from college with my aerospace engineering degree, what these folks have done in the last 10 years alone. This is the first company that has ever launched something into orbit around the sun, and it was a red Tesla Roadster. Like, how cool is that? They have the motivation, but everything has to work.
But we don't know. Maybe China also could be first, because you see that news kind of like that. I was so impressed because in 3 days they put 1,000 people to make a huge hospital for the coronavirus, and then they make 1,000 of bed in 3 days with the building. That kind of country, if they decide, I think they can make a one person, because, and also political background is huge, because they lose the space race to send the first satellite into space. They lose the Apollo race also. They even cannot be in the middle of the Russia and US, but now their chance to make a first kind of entity to put the human on the Mars, if they really want to play with the global political things, that might be also possible.
We have a tendency to flip-flop in the United States. Every administration changes the space policy, and they've got a consistent plan. 2020s at the moon, 2030s, and the 2040s, 2060 is Mars, and they'll just keep pushing on that.
Yeah, only space agencies who doesn't worry about budget cut is the Chinese space agency, so we don't know.
So why did Korea send an astronaut up?
Actually, that is a really interesting question. When I applied for an astronaut, I feel a little bit deceived, because even if the government doesn't say about that, but whole public expect maybe we will have astronaut program continuously after this. Yeah, even if they didn't say officially, because that's the expectation of the first astronaut program. And I also almost think in that way, wow. And then I applied, and then of course I didn't expect to be selected. I just make one of the interesting memory in my PhD boring life. But after all the things done, I talked to the several government people and ministry people, and I realized that it's a quite cheap campaign for the STEM education, because even if you make a huge rocket, even if you make a huge satellite or do anything, general public was not that impressed, because they think it's other people's job. It's not my job. Even if they are using the cell phone, they are not impressed by the communication satellite. But whenever they made one person kind of feel close with you, it's not the white Caucasian, it's not like kind of totally different looking people, because a lot of Korean people know that Russian American national already up there, but it's not impressed because they feel like it's not our thing, it's the other people's thing. But the person like me or other Korean people in the space, they are floating and they wave something, and the small little kid think, oh, if she can do, maybe I can do. And then they can thinking about to study science more, even if math is crazy hard, they really want to try once more. So yeah, Korean government has a huge kind of strategy to make, because every single country nowadays, especially developed country, they have a hard time to make enough workforce in STEM and engineering and technology, because their families well paid enough and they don't have to push themselves. So there's a huge campaign. That's because huge budget coming from the education office and science and technology ministry, they work together.
Yeah. James, how are we going to survive if we get there?
So, like, how are we gonna survive on
Yeah,
Mars?
I mean, you've been developing these training scenarios
Yeah.
and simulations, and how's that really going to work?
And you mentioned earlier, you know, and so you mentioned the human psychology is a real challenge. Well, there's people that have been working on that. So we have a base in Utah called the Mars Desert Research Station, where we are practicing all the human factors challenges of how to operate on the surface of Mars. And we've had 1,200 people go through that base over the last 20 years, and about 230 crews. I had the opportunity to go in 2018 and experience what it was like to go through a Mars mission, where you had to, you know, we're not on Mars, we're in Utah, although it looks a lot like Mars. But we had to put on a simulated spacesuit to leave the building. We had to drive around in rovers to get places. We had to come back inside when our air was gone, and also practice emergency procedures. So we've been studying these operational challenges for a while now, and there's been some real research done of how to be efficient in doing that. And so I think we'll be ready. We'll know that when the mission is approved by whomever, NASA, China, SpaceX, that we know how to do it. And we'll have the procedures ready to go for that.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the competition that you've got coming up?
Yeah, so we actually, Mars Society, we did a competition last year to design the first human colony on Mars, a 1,000-person colony. And we gave away $20,000 in prizes. We got 100 really high-quality entries from around the world. And as a matter of fact, it was MIT that won that competition. And we published all the semifinalists, 25 best designs in a book that's now out on Amazon. And our president, Dr. Zuber, actually handed that book to Elon last week. Now we're announcing the new competition for this year, which is a 1 million person colony, which is, we have Mars City State, that's what we're calling it. And so, yeah, so we're basically looking at what's it going to be like when you have that many people on Mars? How do they live? What's the society like? How do they survive? How do they develop the technology? And we're really looking forward to some of the ideas and designs that come out of that competition.
So since you're talking about life, I've seen The Martian, I know you can grow potatoes, but what else is it like Impossible Burgers on Mars? How are we eating?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. The Martian was a great movie. We're all huge fans of The Martian movie because it was scientifically realistic, unlike most of what comes out of Hollywood. So yeah, actually, you would bring some things with you from Earth for food, but you'd also, and we do this at the analog base, we eat a lot of freeze-dried food. But you could grow plants on Mars, you know, if you had the appropriate equipment to do that, water. You know, and there's things that you can bring from Earth that store for years. That's pretty easy to do. So, but yeah, a lot of it, because Mars doesn't have life that we know of, you're gonna have to bring with you all the ingredients you need to grow food. So you're gonna have to bring with you bacteria and things like that. But it's possible, and I think people will do that someday.
The most resource efficient, nutritious protein is insects. So they're doing stuff on the ISS right now to see if you can grow crickets that then you can turn into food. So an Impossible Burger that's plant and insect based is probably really realistic. How well it will taste?
According to my, it's also, not only do you get to eat wonderful food like crickets, but it's also nice and warm. My Mars weather report says negative 67 degrees Celsius.
Oh my.
A low today of minus 94, which is negative 140 Fahrenheit. So, and it's summer there right now. Cold, eat crickets. Everyone want to go?
Question for James, have you guys, the Mars Society, developed a video game with all your knowledge of building?
So actually, we are working on something right now with Jeff, that's a VR application. What we thought we would do for something like that to get the public interested in what we're doing out in Utah is we figured we would make a VR app, and we would be able to train the people that are gonna go out to Utah from home in VR, and so they would understand the procedures, they would understand how the base is laid out. We even were able to fly a drone and scan about a square mile of terrain. And so we're putting that into a VR app. We're actually gonna demo that at Yuri's Night at the Museum of Flight in April, so. But yeah, we're definitely working on that. And there's actually a lot of interesting projects happening that are Mars related right now. There's a Polish company called Pyramid Games that are building a game called Occupy Mars that looks really good, looks pretty realistic. So yeah, there's a lot happening.
Does anyone know what astronauts are going to be doing for those 6 to 8 months that they'll be on their way to Mars? Like, are they just chilling, waiting?
Hopefully they're just chilling and not trying to repair the spaceship so it doesn't fall apart.
But actually, you know what, even if it's a kind of long time, but based on my experience, there's a lot of job to do because you don't have a plumber, you don't have an electrician, you don't have anybody, you should survive by yourself. And then once you, first time to living in a house rather than an apartment, you realize that how many chores are coming up. So it's kind of like that because all the cleaning more than your house because all the machines, all the gears, you should check it out. And kind of life support system, there's a lot of job required to maintain and check it out. And also you always have a life and death threat, so you should check it out. Everything's not dangerous and safe enough. So even if it's not really critical job, but there's a lot of routine maintenance jobs. I don't think they don't have to worry about being bored or something.
On that front, I mean, I cleaned my office today and find all these little bits of junk in really weird places, right? And then I'll clean the house and I find bits of hair in weird places and this gunky stuff that you figure out is probably dead skin cells, but it falls to the ground and you can clean it up with a vacuum nice and easy. In space, you sneeze, that stuff's floating around.
Yeah,
right?
but in the same time, thank God it's not falling down, it's always floating, and we have a forced air circulation, so they are all stacked up to the mesh in front of the air flow.
But somebody's job is to clean that out.
Yeah. So because they don't have a weight, so whatever just force to push them, they just keep rotating around and keep falling around. So all those dead skin cells or any kind of small little clump, it will not come down, it's just falling around. So that is also dangerous because you can inhale and they can plug somewhere or you can inhale anything. So that makes space also dangerous.
And I think there's also a lot of science that can be done on those first missions because we've never had the chance to directly measure a lot of that interplanetary space. We've done it with probes that maybe do limited measurements, but they tend to be, you want to measure things when they get where they're going. But you'd want to also occupy those people because there's no hypersleep, there's none of that stuff. You know, you're not getting in a tube and sleeping the whole time.
Yeah, if you spend that much money, you really want to make the astronaut take a rest? I don't think so.
Humans need stuff to do.
Yeah.
So there is enough science they could do on the way. The PhD students that would design those experiments aren't doing that now because there isn't an end user for it. So they're designing experiments that'll go on the ISS and probably port a lot of those over for that interstellar or interplanetary mission, and give people things to do, and then try to extract value from that time also because you're paying for it. They're breathing, they're eating, they're staying warm, the all costs mission. So you need to be doing something with their active hours, even if you're trying to keep them at like low rations, low lights, low heat. Like everybody just chill for the time there. We don't need to expend a lot of energy, but still do something people get bored, and that lowers morale. You know, they need to be doing something. So, did that answer your question? You had one too?
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was kinda, you know, your studies that you've done in Utah, obviously you guys have talked about what astronauts went to space or not. What kind of like, behavioral attributes makes a good astronaut, right? I mean, you're talking about someone that I guess has to be fearless in a way to wanna hop on a rocket, and then like 6 to 8 months in a small place, and then you're on a different planet, like.
Yeah, a whole bunch of type.
Everyone put their hand up, yeah, I'd love to go to Mars, but you lose a lot of luxuries when you hop in space and stuff like that. So I'm just wondering what type of person makes a good astronaut, like.
Yeah, that's a really good question, because when I had a training in Russia, and then I luckily met a guy who trained all the way from the Yuri Gagarin until me, is almost a mid-80 guy who is a psychologist. He has every single astronaut's behavior and act kind of, and he told me like, most of the astronaut candidate, not just astronaut, just a candidate, they are quite successful person, and they are quite goal-oriented. So sometimes they trying to deceive psychologists. So kind of like, even if they are not social, they just pretend to be social. And even if they are not that kind of sacrificing person, but they just pretend like that. But they can deceive for short term and for certain competition, but they cannot deceive 24/7. That's because they observed all the astronaut candidates quite continuously, how they react with a really stressful situation, and how they do when they got the huge mission on top of their shoulder. Because based on him, he said, you know what, even if we just qualified at an exam and consultation, how much? Sometimes one astronaut screw everything and make it all place messy. Thank God even before launch, but what if it happens after the launch kind of thing? So as I heard from the expert, rather than the intelligence or smartness or IQ or something, they always more concerned about the psychological stableness, especially surprisingly something unexpected happened. Yeah, thinking about several friends of yours, they are totally normal in the daily life, but once something happened, they just react totally opposite way, and then you realize that these guys are totally different guys. So that's always a big, huge hurdle for the people who pick the crew. And also, yeah, I and Jeff is a really good friend as doing this panel. But what if we live together in small little room? It's a totally different dynamic, right? So that kind of things also you should think about it. And based on our resume and track record, they believe, yeah, she's an engineer, he's a physicist, maybe it's a good match, and she's good at with the people, and then he's also good at with the people. But without having any measurable reason, some people's chemistry is not good. So without having any reason I hate somebody, without having any reason I love somebody, so those things even psychologists cannot explain, they should watch it, they should check it out, how they kind of react to each other.
Yeah, and we see all this at the desert research station in Utah. I mean, people that are like go to school together and known each other for years, they get out to the Utah desert and they're just like butting heads all the time, but they're friends, right? So it's all about, you'd want the crew that goes to Mars to practice together on Earth somewhere, like maybe Antarctica or a base like ours, for a time before they go out, because you want to see them work under stress and work together. But the other question you asked is what kind of skills? You need resiliency. You need people that think outside the box, because there's going to be stuff that happens that doesn't go according to plan, and you need people that can fix things, that can be resilient, that are cross-trained with multiple skills. Like if someone's a doctor, maybe they're also an engineer. So you need a lot of resiliency in the crew, as well as them getting along. And the psychology aspects are just critical too.
I forgot who mentioned, someone said something about, you know, we as a general public are making decisions on how to spend our money. What is one thing that you wish the general public knew that would perhaps change their mind about this whole conversation? If you could get the message out.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. At the Mars Society, we try really hard to just educate the public about the possibility of humans to Mars. I mean, when we started 20 years ago, it was much farther away than it is now. I mean, movies like The Martian have helped out a lot. So just kind of talking about the challenges, the possibilities to the general public are something that we really try hard at. And also, I think VR is really going to be really important, because we can really give someone a visceral experience that touches their life. And once I've had like middle school girls put on a headset and really get emotional that they're walking on Mars. So you want to touch people where they are and with what affects them. And so yeah, I think for space it's all about how's it going to help them, how's it going to benefit humanity. Yeah, but I don't have a perfect answer for that.
One of the things I find that's interesting is how little the general public knows how dependent we are on space today, right? You mentioned we all have a space machine in our pocket. It's communicating constantly with satellites overhead. That's how the maps work. That's how Uber works. All our financial transactions are based on signals from space. The power that comes to your house requires the timing signals from space. Our weather, climate monitoring comes from space. The weather forecasting, you can get a 10-day weather forecast now. That's pretty good. It used to be a couple of days at best. So space is kind of this small industry that has this massive impact on our economy, and most people go about their daily lives and have no idea how dependent we are on it. So that's not an answer about why to go to Mars, but I think having that understanding is one thing. And then I think that just also the public is not very aware, like there's a space station, it's in orbit right now, there are people living on it and they have been for 20 years, not the same people, but we have this permanently crewed human space station in orbit for 20 years, and a lot of people don't know that. And we, it's been 50 years since humanity sent astronauts to the moon, and it's time to do some more. I think that kind of understanding helps. And then I do volunteer work with groups like the Planetary Society, and we go to Washington, D.C., and we meet with staff at the representatives and senators, or you can even call them, and they actually do listen to that kind of thing. So you can talk to them, and I think that's a big deal too. But I think space literacy is a real big issue.
Yeah, and then not only for just educating about space, but also I think basic critical thinking and basic data reading skill is really needed. Because when I was in Korea, some journalists came to me, you know what, you waste our tax money, almost $25 million. What he pointed out is, yeah, it cost $25 million make me to fly to the space. But I just asked him back, and you know what? Government spend $1 million to make the whole congressman doesn't make a rain on their head. From the parking lot to the building, they make a whole kind of hood. It takes $1 million, but nobody knows. So I was so upset because everybody should know how much money is wasting already, and how we can make the politicians be more critical to move that money to the more productive way. Because $25 million wasting, I understand. But thanks to that, a lot of kids watching the TV, and then they thinking about the space, they thinking about going to the Mars, and then they thinking about to do their own homework about a math, even if they didn't want to do it. But $1 million for the only 300 congressmen not to make the rain on top, I don't think so. But a lot of things happen with the money, because have a big, huge gathering because of one representative of a party. There's 1,000 people's gathering. It costs millions and millions of dollars, but people who attending and sitting over there, they don't know how much event it is. But they always point out easily something feasible and something noticeable. But there's a lot of unnoticeable things happen, and then not only US citizens, but also everybody around the globe, we should think more critically how much money we are wasting right now without having any reason, rather than the thinking about we should spend the money to some place.
Within the next 3 to 5 years, are we better off investing in technologies or inventions that will get us directly to Mars, like a propulsion technology, or technology that will create foundation for reducing frictions, all frictions associated going to Mars, like quantum technologies, for example?
They both sound great to me. I mean, there's a lot of technology development happening for propulsion. I mean, there's a former astronaut named Franklin Chang Diaz that's been working on a plasma propulsion system for 10 years plus. But it's such a big system, it's not really practical to like put that on a spacecraft yet. So really miniaturization of stuff like that. But some of the things you talked about could have applications here on Earth. I mean, if you could figure out frictionless quantum stuff, that would help with energy generation, possibly. So I think to answer your question, looking for things that are dual use would be really the best choice out of those.
Yeah, the government should be investing in your basic sciences. and doing that exploration, leading the way for the commercial industry, doing the risky things that companies will not do, because that's not what they're for. But like Dan said, the Apollo program set, now we know what it costs, we know what the risk level is, and before no one knew. And it was down to judgment. And now we can quantify what the risks are. We know how many launches are successful to low Earth orbit. We you know how many satellites fail in orbit, to the point where we can say, for like Starlink with SpaceX, more of them can fail, and it's okay. And you can make them cheap and disposable because other people have already gone there. So if you're looking for investment from the government level, science that is dual use across lots of different industries is probably the best place. As much as I want to spend it directly on like build a thing for Mars, build my spaceship, please. Looking at bang for your buck, that's where I want my tax dollars spent.
Sure.
Just back on this notion of how, and Stan, the illustration of the planets and how far Earth is from, space is from the Earth is helpful. For a 3-year mission, where at some point you can jettison some stuff, you can leave some stuff when you get to Mars, but you can't pick up stuff along the way. What's the payload really look like for that? Like, how many people are we talking? What do they have to take? Forget the fuel for a minute, but just to live for 3 years, because you use a space station as a good example, right? But we're replenishing there, right? And so on. What does that payload look like to feed and water people?
I think the mass estimates I've seen for a 4 to 6 person crew, something like 20 tons or.
Yeah, I was gonna say 50,000 kilograms, 50 tons, but.
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot. I mean, you gotta, it's doable, right? It's like going camping, right?
Yeah.
It is. 3 years.
Even more than that, yeah.
This is a pretty bare bones. I mean, no one's gonna be comfortable. This isn't fun.
Oh yeah, first mission is really.
This is a little bit crazy man in a tin can, guy over the Niagara Falls in a water barrel kind of thing.
Yeah.
However, if Elon is successful with the Starship program, then they will be sending Starships one way, full of cargo first.
Yeah,
And
so
then they'll send out a 50 to 100 crew
That's what I was wondering.
on the first mission.
Yeah. Cash.
It
So the
doesn't have to
government
be
mission
one
is 4 to
rocket.
6
One
people.
rocket anyway.
SpaceX vision is send 100 people. There's reasons to suspect that's a little optimistic in the near term, but that's
So
very
it-
different mission profiles.
Right.
In theory, if I'm right, over the next 10, 17 years, right, there's going to be a few missions testing everything out and potentially taking some things and leaving them there right now. So when we get there, sometime in the future, there's already stuff there for us. It's not everything in our tin can, right?
They would stage things beforehand, before the first crew went out.
As long as they don't land 500 kilometers away.
There's a few things I think we ought to do along the way quickly. First, one is we ought to do some testing around variable gravity. So we've lived on 1G here on Earth and we've lived on 0G in space. We know 0G is very deleterious if you're gonna stay very long. But at Mars, it's about 38% of 0.38 G. So can we spin a space station on the way and give some partial or full gravity? That's one thing. The entry, descent, and landing, putting 50,000 kilograms on Mars, if you do it all at once, the biggest thing we've landed on Mars so far, I think, is a Curiosity rover, which is about 1,000 kilograms.
Yes.
Very complex to do. That's another one. The Mars soil is toxic. It's got perchlorates in it. We need to characterize that. We need to characterize the dust. It could chew up your lungs if you get any inside. We don't quite know what the size elements are there, so we need to do a sample return from Mars.
Yeah, no potatoes right in the soil.
Yeah, and this, we just got budget request from the administration to Congress asking for about $500 million to do sample return from Mars and to do ice mapping for Mars. So these things are starting to happen. I think if we start to see those kind of precursor things, it'll put us in better shape on knowing some of this.
How long do you think it'll be before there's a satellite around Mars?
There are right now 6 of them right now.
I mean, Curiosity is like a partner thing.
Curiosity's sitting on the ground, and InSight rover's on the ground, and there's 3 NASA satellites, 2 European satellites, and 1 Indian satellite going around Mars right now.
And the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter is a NASA mission that got there in 2005 and to map the whole planet.
One of the things that we're doing together that James mentioned earlier is we're taking some of that data and we're actually mapping it in VR so that the terrain that you will experience in VR actually is the real terrain. Kind of crazy stuff. So when he said earlier that you can walk on Mars, you essentially are walking on Mars.
And when we do send humans, we know now where they're gonna go. There's 5 landing sites that NASA's selected for the rover missions that are the same ones you'd use for a permanent human base, so.
James, you got a couple of goodies over there, right? So
Yes.
it's nice for some people at least to be able to take a couple of mementos back, and I'm sure he'll have some more giveaway at the end, so feel free. Similarly, Matt brought some things that have actually even been in space with him. Obviously, so in here.
Treasures to show you. Those are not for giving away. Treasures to show.
So a couple of just random things, just a few little giveaways that are unique and probably you won't see apart from if you hear or meet these guys. But for example, does anyone know when the first mission, successful mission to land on Mars was? Yes, what year it was?
76.
Oh, didn't have a prize. Amazing.
So I have this, it's a metal medallion. It was actually one of our Kickstarter rewards for the VR project. So I have a bunch of these.
So that's almost 50 years ago. Right, it's kind of amazing. 50 years ago. All right, another crazy fact. When was the first time we kind of understood what Mars was and we'd seen it? Within 50 years, let's put it that way. Any random ideas?
Can you repeat the question?
Like when did we first kind of really understand what Mars was?
Like point a telescope at it like in 1750.
Close, not quite. I'll give it within 50.
What does understand mean?
Yeah.
You mean
I'm trying to be generous to give a few people some prizes. Sorry?
You mean like Galileo?
Absolutely. Do you remember the years?
No.
So do you know like what Galileo
If I guess the year, I'll sound stupid, so I'm staying away from
We
that
are.
one.
He already said 1750, and I was like, no, that's not right. Oh.
Yeah, so Galileo actually built like his own telescope to actually get a very clear view and actually document it really well. And he lived from 1564 to 1642. Actually.
Yeah, I'd have been off by about 100 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
But,
Yeah.
we'll give you a couple more, and then we'll go.
Nice, thank you.
Crowdsource that.
How many moons does Mars have?
2.
Oh, look at that. You got that ready?
Got it.
What country just approved a mission to go grab a sample from Phobos, one of Mars' moons? Anyone know that one? Japan.
Japan, yeah.
When will Phobos turn into a ring of Mars?
No, I don't want to.
65 to 70 million years.
Is that right? Say that again. And by the way, a quick round of applause. It's his birthday today. Give everyone that little fact.
So Phobos is slowly disintegrating and will become a ring around Mars in between 65 and 70 million years from now. So pretty much tomorrow.
Not if we have anything to say about it.
Yeah.
Government and, private company thing. So you said there's like 5 places on Mars that people are gonna wanna land. Like who's to stop, the first person there from, hogging all the good spots, or,
No one.
Yeah.
So it's first come, first served.
You can't own property on.
Well, the Outer Space Treaty says that
Other-
nations cannot own, so Earth nations cannot own celestial bodies, but corporations can. And they'd have to fight this in court. If you did that, every spacefaring nation in the world would sue you.
Yeah.
So if you.
But you'd be on Mars, so it wouldn't matter.
If you're.
There's the Mining Rights Act of 1867, which would be used to,
That's the US though.
Yeah.
It was actually recognized
And if-
in the early 1900s by the.
But you'd have to be Russia, China, Japan,
Yeah.
everybody in Europe, like anybody in ESA, they're gonna fight you.
Space pirates.
So again, if you went to one of those places and said, this is mine, and you effectively secede, you'd have to be there. But you could. There's nothing stopping you.
Secede from
The
what?
planet.
Oh.
If you can get there and stay there,
he
no one
bought
can stop
a Lunar Hot, the kind of rover on the moon, and they have a contract with the Russian government with these rich guys, and then Russian government sell out the lunar hood to the several rich people with $50,000. It's really cheap because they don't have to deliver it. They just give the ownership to these rich guys. And then I asked them, why did you buy it, even if you cannot own it? And he said, based on the whole history of the Earth, whenever people fight against the territories and landowners, and then finally, person who invested money on that land always won. Rather than the who put the flag first, it's not. Always the person who put the money on top and then invest or farming or digging or making a building, they always won around the globe. So he think if the moon will be kind of fight against everybody's to own some land of the moon, my lunar hood going around my properties over there is digging the ground and then making the dirt around. So I already invest the money so I can declare this is a part of my own land. So I don't know if it's correct or not, but he believes strongly after 300, 500 years later, one of his offspring can claim that it's our own land. So that kind of arguing always happens.
I'll do one more question, then we'll move on. Somebody mentioned it earlier, actually, so this is going to test how well you are listening. And whoever can get their hands and voices out first. How many people have walked on the moon?
Ooh.
24.
It's not true.
That's what somebody said, though.
Somebody did say
Somebody
that
said
at a
that.
slightly separate time. So you, and then we'll come back to that in a minute once we get the
Something for
answer.
listening. He
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
said something for listening.
There you go.
That's good.
Anybody else have an idea?
Oh.
Guys, tell me, it's about 12, right?
Exactly
Oh,
12.
yeah.
12 people. Sorry?
How come?
On the moon.
On the moon.
Someone stayed inside the vessel?
Yeah, so
Oh,
every
they
time they
can
go,
actually get out.
exactly,
Yeah.
they'll have half, and that goes back to the 24.
24.
And it's also the same number of people who have actually been able to see the entire Earth with their eyes.
Yeah, right.
So there have been 9 missions to the moon. There were 3 astronauts on each, but a couple of them, 2 or 3 of them went twice to the moon. So a couple of missions, nobody landed. Apollo 8, Apollo 10. 11, 12, 14, 15, 16, 17 landed. 13 had the explosion in space. So they went to the moon, but they didn't
Around
walk.
it,
So
yeah.
six missions landed, 2 people on each, 12 people.
Yeah, 12 people. Steps on the moon.
And all
What did you say
men.
about seeing the whole Earth?
First woman on the moon, can't wait for
From,
this.
from the station, you can't see the entire Earth.
Do you remember
At one time.
With your own
Yeah.
eyes, because you're
Right.
really close to it.
Right.
Think of that ball that Stan showed you, how far away, you see the, you can see the circumference.
Yeah,
of the Earth.
thinking about that, you are above only 200 miles away.
Right.
Yeah.
Then how can you see the whole several thousand kilometers out there? So you only can see the at most 200 miles wide. So you cannot see whole. So my country is small enough. Korean peninsula is really small. So I expect to see whole peninsula, but I couldn't see. Yeah,
Oh, wow.
just half of that.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing. You see these pictures of space and you think, everybody sees this nice, beautiful picture. No, they see this amazing, I'm sure, but yeah, only 24 people have seen the entire Earth.
The Earth.
Yeah, kind of crazy. All right, let's move on. Did I get my question out? Roughly, there is no exact number, of course, right? Because we haven't been there yet. But there are estimates of, Stan, I think you mentioned this earlier, right? 50 to 400 billion dollars for us to get there. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money. For my, I could do that.
It's not a war.
It's not a war. So it'd be interesting to compare it actually.
And for everybody in the audience, that's where my salary comes from, is the Department of Defense. So I'm working for the men, very skeptical of how we spend our money, because I'm very frugal. I want to be frugal with my tax dollars, even though they pay my bills. But yeah, it's not exorbitant. No. Not even a couple of years in Iraq. That's not a big deal.
What's interesting about that number I threw up there, that's what's estimated if we go in 2037. As you may know, there are plans afoot to get us there a lot sooner. There are also some plans that say there's no way we're going to get anywhere near that. It's going to be more like 2060. Right? Oh, what is it? Oh dear. So the question, I'm just going to flip. I did do a hotkey there.
Anybody work for Microsoft? You know that?
Why is that not working?
The bottom, yeah.
There it is. Yeah, there
That
it
one,
is.
there you go.
Yeah.
Did that. So that really gets us to the question of,
Or what terms is that money in?
At the level of accuracy of this, it almost doesn't matter.
yeah, I don't know if everybody else thinks that our accuracy numbers.
Usually it would be
We don't know, right? But there's, and let's actually go there, right? Let's see, what is it really going to cost, and what are those boundaries that would actually help us decide when it is really plausible?
In 2017, Elon Musk said, just to mention the cost bit, at Guadalajara at the International Astronautical Congress, he said that he wanted to create a 1 million-person city on Mars in the 40 to 100-year time frame. And he thought that it would cost somewhere between, he said, 10 billion and $1 trillion. So a factor of 100, no, is that right? 100, yeah. He thought it would cost, so that's for setting up a city, but that's probably optimistic too. But if we're talking just a Mars Direct type of mission, I think it's within the possibility, again, taking risks and doing things a little bit, not government precision. I think you could probably get into tens of billions of dollars.
I agree. I mean, in the late 90s, we were saying 8 billion for Mars Direct. That was probably a little optimistic, but even now I would say it's probably around 20 to 30 billion in today's dollars if we decide to go right now. And that's Mars Direct, that's really the cheapest possible mission, 4 people, 1 mission, or actually, if you do that over 10 years, you'd have 3 full flights. But still, like, that's something the country can afford if it's that on that
Well, I
order.
think that if the country's gonna pay for it, it's gonna be 400 billion, because the purpose of NASA fundamentally is to create jobs, and I don't mean that. It's just the way it is. This SLS, this is called the Space Launch System, but it's really kind of more like the Senate labor system, right? It's about creating jobs in districts and creating technology, and space is an important part of it. I'm not trying to be too negative, but they have a different objective necessarily than getting to Mars efficiently.
So when do you think we will get there? Let's put $10 out right now.
If I would say that if U.S. government or China does it, it's going to be close to 2050, and then like 2040 is probably at best. But we're within the range. It could be, if things if the space race gets going again, I think it could be faster. If it's SpaceX, I think they can, with their track record, they can probably build this Starship. They have to build a super heavy booster underneath it. They want to orbital test this within a year or so. Given all space projects expand by 2 or 3x, but within this decade, we should see them landed on Mars. I suspect not with humans on it, but I would think that in the 2030s, you could see potentially humans on Mars if SpaceX can do it. But I think there's a lot of things that have to go exactly right for them in order for them to pull it off.
And the other component of that is saying whether or not we should go to the moon first, right? I mean, that's a big consideration that could potentially.
And that is current national policy. It's just a race quickly to go back to the moon and land humans again by 2024, and set up a permanent presence by 2028, and then start to work on Mars after that. That's current national space policy under Space Directive 1.
Yeah, whatever you think about Trump, he is the first president to come into office in his first year and give NASA a goal. And if he is reelected, again, whatever you think about that, it would happen in his second term, and that's what we're on track for right now, to go back to the moon. Now, they would go with this lunar orbital gateway architecture, where they're gonna build a mini ISS in lunar orbit and use it as a permanent command module that you can change orbits with. And the thinking there is that would allow them to go to places like the South Pole of the moon, which is interesting because there's water ice there. So if you had that architecture, it is somewhat better than Apollo. It is more sustainable, more permanent, but it also would take 6 launches for 1 human landing for that architecture. So at the Mars Society, one of the things that Dr. Zubrin talks about is a modification called Moon Direct, where you could actually use SpaceX hardware to go back to the moon. You use 1 Falcon Heavy launch to land a small power generation and ice mining operation on Shackleton Crater. And then you start getting the water ice. You can use that to make rocket fuel to come back to Earth. And then you'd send the crew out with 1 Falcon 9. And so you would actually have a sustainable program of lunar exploration going directly to the surface with just 2 Falcon launches. And so that's, you know, an idea he's out there talking about right now.
Yeah, and I think we all look at the moon as a closer, safer, cheaper practice and a test bed for all these technologies, where if you build your Mars ship and send it to Mars and it breaks halfway and everyone dies, it's hard to learn from that because it's out there, you don't get it back, and you can't easily go get it. It's hard to iterate. So the moon is, well, I guess Utah is your learn fast, fail fast, cheap, version of working on that, and then a more realistic version of that is on the moon.
Right.
And anything you learn on the moon, you can port that over to Mars. And there'll be new challenges on Mars, but you will have gotten over the hump, as it were, by doing it on the moon first.
Yeah. If you built the Mars hardware but then used it to go to the moon first, you could practice it out, and you could have a moon program basically for free if you did it that way.
So now you're a bit more optimistic about the timeframes, right? When do you think it's feasible?
I don't know. It depends on some factors. If we could do it sooner, it really depends on the Chinese space race, because the Chinese are sort of doing their own thing without worrying about what the rest of the space community is doing. And they have rovers on the moon right now. They're exploring places on the moon that no one else has explored, and they're working on their own separate space station, working on their own launches. So it would take our government either wanting to match that, or seeing it as a direct military threat and moving military money over, and getting in another Cold War-ish space race where we're trying to do something by the end of the decade. And we started, so we have 10 full years to do it.
Yeah.
And I think if we get into that sort of a political situation where it really comes down to political will, it's voters voting for dollars to be spent this way. And in the 60s we didn't, because we needed to beat the Russians. And now we don't have that political will. But if we got that from competing with the Chinese, we could do it. That's where you talk about doing it in 2030.
James, can you talk a little bit about the Chinese space base on Earth that they're building?
Yeah, no, so we got the ball rolling with the Mars Analog Research Program in 2001 with our base in Utah. We actually had one up in the Arctic in Canada before that as well. There's a lot of other folks that are building those now. So NASA has one in Hawaii. They've done that for a while, several years now. But China and UAE both have built multi-million-dollar Mars analog bases. We wish we had multi-millions of dollars to run our desert research station. We've got to do it on a shoestring. But they've built a pretty huge campus in China in the Gobi Desert. We've seen pictures of it. It looks very interesting. Would love to go there. It's highly secretive, of course. But yeah, they're serious about what they're doing.
Can you explain what you mean by analog base?
Yeah, an analog base, it's basically a simulated Mars base. It's not the real hardware that you would actually send to Mars. It kind of looks like it. Our base in Utah is essentially a landed spacecraft. We call it the HAB. It's a 2-deck sort of dome on the top and 2-story building. It's enough room for about 6 people to stay for several weeks. And we also have a couple smaller facilities there too, like a small science dome and a greenhouse, and the Musk Observatory that he donated money for. But the one in China is really a huge research campus, probably can accommodate 50 or so people, much bigger than what we have.
It's interesting to me because we do think, historically, we've landed all the landers on Mars, right? Clearly China is looking at space with a whole new perspective on, if this isn't a race, it is to them, it seems, right? So, to us, if we want to be
Probably.
in it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a core strategic plan it's part of their multi-decade vision.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right,
Same with UAE. I think they have a similar mindset of multi-years. They want to have a city in 100 years.
Yeah, that's just fascinating because no one ever thinks of UAE. I mean, it's a little bit like South Korea, and no one thought about it. UAE, talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so UAE is the country where Dubai is in the Middle East, and so they have a strategic plan to invest in Mars. They have a Mars mission going later this year. It's the first mission from that country, and they have an analog base that they've built recently, and they're very serious about it. People from UAE come to our conferences, very serious about it. So
They are so serious because they believe space might be the after their oil money they needed to invest, so they are quite aggressive.
Right, we've got 10 minutes left, so for my watchers, right? Another little fascinating fact, right? You cannot burp in space. Did anybody realize that? Isn't that crazy? I'm sure you know this stuff firsthand, right? There's so many of these weird things that we just take for granted. And we have an idea why you can't burp in space?
Pressure. Air pressure, no. Air doesn't float because the fluids basically aren't heavier.
Exactly. Gravity pulls the fluids down and the gases up, right? And makes you burp. In space, there is no gravity to pull and separate these things. So you do what's called a vomit. Right?
Yeah, if you want to really burp, you almost vomit. It's all together, just get out.
Does that mean no acid indigested too, or?
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually what they describe it as being like.
Yeah, that's because we cannot drink the soda or beer. We cannot do that. Not only because we cannot bring it up there because of the air in there, but also we cannot burp, so it's a dangerous for swallow.
I wonder if Budweiser knows that, because they're investing in trying to be the first beer in space.
Yeah, there's a several kind of people trying to invent the space beer.
Yeah.
So they just trying to figure out how to make the beer not to make you burp in space, kind of like that.
Flat beer, flat warm beer.
Yeah.
They've sent yeast. Some
Yeah,
microbrews have
yeast,
sent
yeah,
yeast
yeah.
up.
Yeah,
and
they
back.
sent whiskey to age up there.
Yeah, right. So they send the yeast and they bring it back, make beer. That's the space beer, not the beer to send to the
Oh,
space.
okay, no one's gonna drink it.
And of course, that relates to
Take it to Mars.
anything that goes up that way comes down that way too, right? Makes it a little bit interesting.
And also your digestion is a little bit slow also, because not only your stomach but also intestine. So food going down not only because they are moving but also because of the gravity. But in space you don't have the gravity, so food going down a little bit more slower, and you feel always a little bit longer, feel full when you eat the food. Yeah.
Because of that reason too, there are some foods that you're not allowed to eat or take into space, right? Because it's not only for your gut, can be lethal. Like these gases that not good gases. All right, so I wanted to open it up to basically to you guys for the last few minutes, and there's some seed questions, but yeah, we've actually had a pretty good interactive session, but I'd love to just get a few more minutes. You've got some burning questions, let's get them out. Yeah, boom.
So, 3D printing technology comes so far where we can essentially 3D print an entire building using one printer now.
Yep.
Has there, out of pure curiosity, has there been discussion around installing one of these on Mars and just remotely telling it to 3D print an entire building on there?
Absolutely, there's a lot of work that's being done on that already. NASA is doing a 3D printing challenge this year. They've done a couple already. I actually got to go see a team at Caltech a couple years ago. They built a 3D printer in one of the garages on the campus, one of the Caltech houses on the campus, where they were taking simulated moon dirt and putting it through an extruder that superheated it and printing out bricks that fit together kind of like Legos. But that's a real concept of, yeah, you could send out some hardware to the moon or Mars and just print a base, and then the humans get there and the base is already built.
And then economically it's really good, because when you're making something and it bring to the moons or Mars, they should bear the whole 3D launch and shaking and all kind of thing. So that's because they make a space structure is really strong, because we have a lot of G's and kind of thing. But if you just send the material and if they just build over there, they don't have to be strong like that. They don't have to be heavy like that. So that might be much efficient and economic way to build something.
And why stop with buildings? I mean, you can 3D print hardware, computer hardware, even clothing. I mean, all that's gonna have Earth applications soon too, where you're gonna like dial up what you wanna wear and it's just gonna come out of a printer.
Replicator, Star Trek replicator.
I was actually gonna ask about Star Trek, so I'm not a Trekkie, but I think it took place about 2350. So, like how far, you were talking about the first time we go to Mars, but how far ahead is like a Star Trek type world, or like the Jetsons or whatever, like analogous sort of, I grew up with the Jetsons, but.
Well, one of the big projects you would want to do once you had people on Mars is you'd want to turn Mars into a planet like Earth, and it's called terraforming. And we actually know how to do this already. You basically take greenhouse gases, kind of like we have on Earth that are messing up the environment. Those would be great on Mars because you could thicken the atmosphere, you could heat up the atmosphere and the surface and thicken it and get out some of the carbon dioxide that's in the soil. But eventually you could, and the other thing you'd have to do, Mars doesn't have a magnetic field like the Earth does, so you'd have to give it one. And there's ways to do that by having like a large plate in Mars orbit that kind of generates that through the just interaction between Mars and the sun. So once you did all those things, it's like step 1, 2, 3, you can actually turn Mars into something like Earth.
This reminds me a little bit of a Seinfeld episode of, you know, we're
Yeah,
gonna
it's
build
gonna
a
take
big
a while.
rocket and then yada, 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 and we'll have this. Ian.
So I have an educational question. I'm like many grandparents today, I'm raising a 7.5-year-old granddaughter who has aspirations of going into space, and we recently were talking about Mars. So what would you be able to lay out as a roadmap related to necessary education, necessary experience to put into, and I'm also on a couple of school boards where we talk about science and so forth. So what is there available that could be drawn in readily to start leading these young minds towards really preparing themselves so that the resource of people isn't just people who are enthusiastic, but they're actually properly oriented, properly trained, and properly educated so that we can really, you know, not have to be looking for those special people, but it becomes a natural part of the community growth.
That's a great question. That is something we want to do at the Mars Society. It would be to essentially have a certification program that would teach students and young adults and even you know, the rest of them how to learn space-related skills. It really would start with, you know, just the basics of STEM. You know, you'd want to start all the students early with STEM fields. But there's all kinds of different skills that we would like at the Mars Society, we would like to offer as certification training. And there's also other organizations like Singularity University in the Bay Area, International Space University. There's organizations out there that are doing that now. So if you're involved with a school board, I would definitely recommend you check out some of the programs that are out there now because there's some information available that you can bring.
Is there any central reservoir of that kind of information that people can tap into so that each person isn't having to go out and create that on their own?
I'm working on a site called Marspedia. We're trying to have some of that stuff on there. Marspedia.org.
And also Association of Space Explorers, and that is a small little association of the astronauts around the world, and they are trying to make some resource in one place for the whole teacher around the world and the whole school around the world, because even if there is a good resource of the education, it's not easy to find actually, like you and other teachers, and even if they really want to teach them a basic science, even some science teachers, they are not good at that, they cannot teach the kids, so that might be the really important thing. So now, that's really interesting kind of thing. Everybody believes that there's something over there, because nowadays the internet is everywhere, Wi-Fi is everywhere. But that's because nobody has gathered something in one place, and then not many people are concerned about the systems and kind of branch. So that is also part of the education, I think, because a lot of the young generation, as I watch, and everything's that take as granted and automated. They don't think about how it works. They don't think about what it comes from. And then they don't know what banana trees looks like because they always buy the banana from the grocery store. And they don't know which is the fruit or which is the vegetable also, because they never think about it.
Tomatoes are confusing.
Yeah. So those basic systems and basic mechanics, basic science, nowadays easily to just swipe out because everybody just can do Google. So, but to go to the space, you should know the basic. Like, what if you have a power outage, and then what you can do, what you cannot do. So we knows that, but a lot of the younger generation, even if a power outage, for whole 10 days, they can think they can use a phone, still they can use Google. So all those basic education, I think, is really, really important.
And for working with kids, besides just, they need to focus on STEM, but there's ways to keep them motivated. So Chris Hatfield did all of the videos from the space station, and they're all on the Canadian Space Station channel. on YouTube. So every little video, I'm watching it with my 2-year-old because daddy loves rockets. And he goes through things like, what does a washcloth look like, and how do you brush your teeth, and in the kid-friendly way, how do you go to the bathroom? How does floating look like? What does my food look like? All those things where you can make it real for children, besides study hard in school.
Right.
And for slightly older kids, thinking that they don't have to do hard science that is directly related to space. They don't have to do space science to do space things. And they don't have to do rocket engineering to work on space things. I know some geologists who their PhD was all about finding the reference samples for the Mars rover. So basically they taught the robot, this is chalk, this is a diamond. And he's a ground geologist and got into space things and was never going to be an astronaut. But he worked on Opportunity. And what he worked on taught that robot that flew to Mars how to figure out what Mars is made of. And so those sorts of things where you don't have to be doing the things that are in the movies. You don't have to be a fighter pilot, unless you want to be a mission shuttle commander, which you don't get to be those anymore anyway. But you don't have to do those classic right stuff sort of things to do space things. One of my coworkers is an accountant, and he's worked exclusively at space startups. And that's all he wants to work on. So, X-Core and Blue Origin and Sistema and all these places, but he's a CFO.
Yeah.
So you don't have to give up on the dream of astronaut if you have glasses, or if you can't run fast, or whatever it is. You can still do space things. So I'd start with YouTube, especially with a 7-year-old, where they already know how to get to it anyway.
And she knows everything.
And just steering them that way and keeping that passion alive, and make sure you tie that passion back to school. Because school is what will get you there, but the passion is the only thing that will keep you in school.
He played the guitar too.
He did, he did. And they didn't have to have people off screen with towels for the guitar player, but they had to fly a guitar to space.
That's crazy.
How much volume does it doesn't weigh a lot, but that takes up so much space in the capsule on the way up.
Paul, how are we doing, Tom? We've got time for one more question here? Yeah?
Yeah, so about making Mars much like Earth for building an infrastructure, would there be any combustible energy source that's present in Mars, or would people need to send some kind of fossil fuel to Mars to make it?
No, you could make methane. You make methane from the carbon dioxide in the air and a little bit of hydrogen.
You can take some hydrogen with you.
Or you could get it out of the water on Mars
Yeah.
too. So, but yeah, no, you make methane pretty easily. That's a chemical reaction that's been used in the industry since the 1800s. So.
Yeah, you want to find stuff when you get there. The cost of bringing anything with you is astronomical.
That's really good.
So total recall is possible.
The Philip K. Dick book.
The
maybe.
book, yeah. The
Yeah.
movie, there's a lot of weird stuff in that movie. It's a great movie. But living on Mars and making you'd make all of your energy there. It'll all be solar. It'll all be fuel cell recombination. You'd make the fuel to come back. It's all current science capable. You just need to do it.
Real quick, what do you think will be the first piece of true Martian art, and do you think that Terrans will be able to understand it?
I think it'll be done by Terrans or like close immigrants. So you separating it from Earth art is not a.
It's gonna be a heart in the sand with initials.
Just the footprint of the first person on Mars. Hopefully, it's a woman. I think that'll be iconic, just like Neil Armstrong's footprint is iconic.
Well, thank you all very much. Thanks to everybody for coming. Please check out our schedule and come to more of our events. And you may go ahead and mingle for a few minutes up here if you want to.
If anybody's interested in the federal space policy or space budgets, next Tuesday night, there's a Space Entrepreneurs event. Come up and see me. I can tell you about it if you're interested. It's in South Lake Union. It should be Casey Dwyer from the Planetary Society is going to be giving an interesting talk.
Yuri's Night at the Museum of Flight, April 11th. There'll be a rock band and we'll have VR.
Oh, that sounds good.
We'll be around and we're going to go for beers after if anyone's interested too. Thanks for coming, everyone. What's it?
I lived a lot.